You're not leaving this town alive.
Some folks say love can save a soul. Others say it'll drag you straight into the fire. This here's the story of a lawman and the outlaw girl who swore she'd follow him, even if it meant riding all the way to hell. It started in a small, dust-choked town where justice came from the barrel of a gun, and trust was rarer than rain. He was the sheriff, bound to the law. She was wanted in 3 states, bound to nothing but revenge. They should have been enemies, and yet fate, mean as it is, threw them onto the same trail, chasing the same devils. Gun smoke, betrayal, blood on the dirt, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a promise neither of them could turn back from. This ain't just a tale about the West. It's about how far a heart will go when it's got nothing left to lose. Like this story so far? If it's pulling at something in your chest, or if you just love a good Wild West mystery, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories ride. Now back to the tale. 1883, Dry Creek, Wyoming Territory. The wind carried dust like a warning that day, scraping against the wooden walls of the saloon and rattling the tin sign above the sheriff's office. Caleb Hart leaned back in his chair, boots planted on the porch rail, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that had seen more graves than weddings in this town. The sun was burning white-hot in the sky, the kind that made men slow to move and quick to shoot. The ground trembled before the sound reached him. Hoofbeats, not the lazy trot of a ranch hand or the steady approach of a stagecoach. This was the frantic gallop of someone running from something or toward it. Caleb sat up, eyes narrowing toward the empty street. A black mare appeared from the haze, its rider hunched forward, one arm clutching her side. She rode hard, like the devil himself was on her trail. Her hair, long and wild, caught the light in dark copper streaks. The townsfolk began to stir, drifting to doorways, murmuring. She reined the horse in so sharp it reared, its hooves striking the air. Caleb saw the crimson soaking her shirt before she slid from the saddle, her boots hitting the ground with more grit than grace. The whispers started immediately. That's her. Raven Doyle. Wanted in 3 states, dead or alive. Caleb rose slowly, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip, not drawing it yet, but close enough to make a point. She looked right at him, steady despite the wound. "You're the sheriff?" she asked, voice raw from the ride. "I am," he answered. "Good." She took 2 staggering steps forward before her knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the dirt, feeling the heat of her blood on his palm. She didn't pass out, though. She gritted her teeth and whispered, "I'm not here to surrender. I'm here to trade." He carried her inside the office, ignoring the stares through the window. The jail cell's cot wasn't much, but it was better than the ground. She winced as he set her down. "What's the trade?" he asked. "Information," she said, pulling a crumpled piece of cloth from her pocket. It was marked with something dark, dried blood, and tied around what looked like a carved bone button. "You want Slade's gang? I can take you to M." Caleb's eyes hardened. "You were with them." Her jaw tightened. "Once. Doesn't mean I am now. Why help me?" "They killed my brother," she said flatly, meeting his gaze without a blink. 2 years back. Red Hollow. "You remember?" Caleb did. He'd been there when the smoke cleared. He'd seen bodies laid out in the mud. Men, women, children. His wife among them. Her name echoed in the back of his skull like a church bell. "You're wanted for robbery and murder," he said after a long pause. She smirked without humor. "I robbed, sure. Murder? That was theirs. And if you want proof, I'll give it after Slade's dead." The room felt smaller with her in it. She was dangerous, no question. But there was something in her voice that wasn't lying. Caleb poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank like she hadn't in days. Outside, boots thudded on the boardwalk. The door swung open and Deputy Ellis stuck his head in, his face tight. "Sheriff, you got half the town outside. Wantin' to know why you ain't got her in irons." Caleb glanced at Raven, who met his stare like she was daring him to put the cuffs on. "Tell them she's under arrest," Caleb said. "And tell them I don't answer to a mob." Ellis swallowed, nodded, and left. The air between them shifted. Raven leaned back against the cot, eyes scanning his badge. "You gonna chain me or trust me?" "Neither," he said, moving to his desk. "You'll stay here tonight. We ride tomorrow at dawn. But if you try to run—" "I won't," she cut in. "Not until I've had my shot at Slade." The sun dipped low, painting the office in long shadows. Caleb sat at his desk, pretending to read a ledger but listening to the sound of her breathing. It wasn't steady. Pain still had her, though she hid it well. As night settled, the sound of boots came again, heavier this time. Caleb's hand went to his gun. The door burst open and 3 men stepped inside. Miners by the look, drunk and mean. "She's a killer," one slurred, pointing at Raven. "We ain't waitin' for no trial. We're talking her now." Caleb stood, slow and deliberate. "You'll leave," he said, "before I make you." The man laughed, stepping closer. Caleb moved faster than the eye could track. The hammer clicked back and the barrel of his Colt was inches from the man's temple. "You got 3 seconds, Caleb said, voice like cold iron. They backed out, muttering. Caleb holstered the gun without looking at Raven. "You protect me now, Sheriff," she said softly. "You'll have to keep doing it. People don't like when you save the wrong kind." He didn't answer. Instead, he poured himself coffee that had been sitting too long on the stove. She watched him, eyes sharp. "You think you know the road you're on," she said. "You don't. Slade's not just a man. He's a sickness. And if you're not careful, he'll take from you again." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's taken all he can." Her smile was bitter. "You think that? Wait till you see him." Outside, the wind howled through the dark like a warning neither of them would heed. Inside, the sheriff and the outlaw sat in the glow of a single lamp, the trail to hell already laid out before them. The first hint of morning came in a pale line across the horizon, the kind of cold light that didn't warm anything yet. Caleb had been awake for hours, listening to the creak of the building in the wind and the occasional shift of Raven's weight on the cot. She didn't sleep like someone at peace, more like someone ready to wake swinging. By the time the rooster at Granger's livery started up, Caleb was already saddling his horse. The street was quiet, but he knew eyes would be watching from behind curtains. Folks in Dry Creek didn't miss much, and an outlaw riding out with the sheriff was the kind of sight they'd chew over for months. Raven stepped out of the office wearing the same torn shirt she'd arrived in, a fresh bandage wrapped tight under her coat. She moved stiff, but there was no sign of weakness in her face. Caleb handed her the reins to a dun mare, one of the steadier mounts in town. "You ride her easy," he said. "She'll get you where we're going without fighting you." Raven glanced at the horse, then at him. "I don't ride easy, Sheriff." "I noticed." They rode out as the sun was breaking over the hills, the wind carrying the smell of sage and dust. For the first mile, neither spoke. Caleb preferred it that way. Words were cheap out here, and he'd rather spend his attention scanning the ridgelines for trouble. Eventually, Raven broke the silence. "You've been after Slade a while." 5 years, Caleb said. 5 years chasing the same man. You must be real good at failing." He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "You keep talking like that, and I might start believing you're still with him." "I'm not with anyone," she said sharply. "Not anymore." The road wound through a narrow pass, the cliffs on either side littered with boulders. It was a place made for ambushes, and Caleb's gut told him they weren't alone. He slowed his horse, signaling for her to do the same. "What is it?" she asked, scanning the rocks. "Could be nothing," he murmured. "But keep your hand near your gun." The attack came quick, a shot from the rocks to their left, the report echoing through the pass. Caleb's hat spun off his head as the bullet grazed the brim. He fired back without thinking, the blast kicking dust from a boulder where a figure ducked out of sight. 2 more riders burst from the shadows ahead, their faces wrapped in bandanas. Caleb's rifle was in his hands before they'd closed the distance. The first man fell from his saddle before his horse even knew he was dead. The second veered off, returning fire. Raven's mare danced under her, but she stayed steady, drawing a colt so smooth it looked like second nature. Her shot took the fleeing rider in the shoulder, spinning him around. The gunfire stopped as quick as it started. Caleb dismounted, moving up the rocks where the first shooter had been. He found nothing but an empty shell casing and a faint trail of blood. "Slade's men," Raven called from below. "Could be," Caleb said, sliding back down. "Could be somebody else wants the bounty on your head." Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the reins tightened. "That's not the way they work. If Slade wanted me dead, you wouldn't hear the shot coming." Caleb didn't answer. He mounted up and pushed forward, the pass widening into open country. They stopped at a creek by midday, letting the horses drink. Raven crouched at the water's edge, cupping her hands to drink. Caleb stood guard, scanning the distance. "You trust anyone?" she asked suddenly. "No," he said. She smirked. "Good. That makes two of us." They pressed on into the afternoon, the heat settling over them like a heavy blanket. By the time the sun began to lower, they reached a lonely way station. Just a small cabin, a barn, and a corral. Smoke curled from the chimney. An old man stepped out, leaning on a cane. "Sheriff Hart, thought you might have died out there." "Not yet," Caleb said. "We'll need a place for the night." "You got room?" The old man's eyes flicked to Raven. "You bringin' trouble with you?" "Always," Caleb said, leading his horse to the corral. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Raven sat at the table while Caleb and the old man, Grady, talked low in the corner. "You're heading toward the Black Range," Grady said. "Not much out there but rocks and rattlers." "There's more," Caleb replied. "Slade's been moving through that country. I aim to cut him off." Grady spat into the fire. "Careful. That man's got eyes everywhere." Later, when the old man had gone to bed, Caleb found Raven still awake, staring into the flames. "You ever think about quitting?" she asked quietly. "Every day," he said. "Then I remember my wife's face, and I keep going." She looked away, her voice low. "My brother was 17, barely had stubble on his chin. They shot him in the back while he was running. The fire popped between them." "You kill any of them yet?" Caleb asked. "One," she said. "It didn't help." They sat in silence after that, the kind that wasn't awkward but heavy, like the weight of something too big to set down. In the dead of night, Caleb woke to a sound outside. He slipped from his bedroll, colt in hand, and stepped onto the porch. Moonlight washed the yard in silver. At the corral, two figures were trying to lead off the horses. Caleb fired a warning shot, and the men bolted for the trees. Raven was at his side in an instant, gun drawn. "You think they were after the horses or us?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," Caleb said. "They'll be back." The rest of the night passed without sleep. At first light, they were back on the trail, pushing harder now. The air grew thinner as they climbed into the foothills, the land turning to jagged rock and twisted pines. By mid-morning, they spotted smoke far ahead, curling above a canyon. Raven reined in, eyes narrowing. "That's them," she said. Caleb studied her. "You sure? I'd stake my life on it." "You already have," he said. They moved in slow, skirting the ridge until they found a narrow overlook. Below, the canyon opened into a hidden hollow where half a dozen men lounged around a campfire. Horses were tied nearby, packs heavy with supplies. Caleb's jaw clenched when he saw the man sitting apart from the rest, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a rifle across his knees. "Slade." Raven's hand drifted to her gun. "We could end it now." "No," Caleb said. "Too many. We'd be dead before we hit the bottom. So we wait. We watch, learn their movements, then we take them apart piece by piece." For the next hour, they studied the camp. Slade barely moved, but his men were restless, always glancing toward the canyon mouth. It was a sign they were expecting someone. When Caleb and Raven pulled back from the ridge, the silence between them felt different. Not trust, not yet, but an understanding. By the time they made camp that night, the moon was high and the wind carried the smell of the enemy's fire. "You sure about this?" Raven asked as she settled near the flames. "No," Caleb said, "but I'm sure about one thing. Slade doesn't walk away from me twice." She smiled faintly, a shadow of something almost human in her eyes. "Then I guess I'm following you to hell." And in the dark, with the distant sound of coyotes, Caleb couldn't tell if it was a promise or a warning. The night wind in the hills had teeth, gnawing through coats and blankets. Caleb lay with his hat pulled low, eyes half shut, but his ears stayed sharp. A coyote's howl came from far off, answered by another. Then silence. Silence out here wasn't peace, it was warning. He turned his head slightly. Across the fire, Raven was awake, her face in shadow, staring into the flames like she was reading something only she could see. The way she held herself, still but ready, told him she'd heard the same thing he had. "Riders," she said under her breath. Caleb was already up, moving to his horse. He untied the rifle, scanning the black mouth of the trail below. The moon slid behind a cloud, and for a moment they were blind. Then faint shapes emerged, 3 men, no lights, riding low in the saddle. They didn't come straight on. They were circling. "Scouts," Caleb said. "For Slade?" she asked. He nodded. "Or for whoever's paying to see us dead." Raven slid her colt free without sound. The riders stopped about 100 yards off. One of them dismounted, crouching to study the ground where their horses had passed earlier. Caleb's finger rested against the trigger guard. "If they come closer." "They won't," Raven cut in. "They'll ride back and tell him we're here." And they did, fading into the dark the way they came. At first light, Caleb had them on the move. The canyon with Slade's camp wasn't far, but he knew better than to ride into it blind. He led them off the main trail, weaving through rock spires and dry creek beds until they reached a narrow saddle overlooking the hollow. The camp had changed overnight. There were more horses now, more men. 2 were skinning a deer by the fire, while others were loading supplies into saddlebags. "They're moving," Caleb said. "Or getting ready for a job," Raven replied. Her eyes narrowed. "That one by the fire, his name's Porter. He's the one who pulled the trigger on my brother." Caleb studied her face. There was no tremble, no flare of temper, just a hard focus that was more dangerous than rage. "You take the shot now," he said, "and every man down there will be on us." "I wasn't asking for permission," she said. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You kill him now, you might not live long enough to get to Slade. You came out here for him." Her jaw tightened, but she lowered the gun. "Then let's get this over with." They waited until the camp settled into its mid-morning lull. 2 men rode out, heading east. Another wandered off into the brush. The numbers thinned just enough for Caleb to make his move. They crept down through a dry wash, staying low, until they were close enough to hear the crackle of the fire and the low rumble of voices. Caleb signaled to Raven. She'd circle left, he'd go right. The first man never saw him coming. Caleb's rifle stock hit him square across the jaw, dropping him cold without a shot fired. Raven's approach wasn't as quiet. Porter caught a glimpse of her, cursed, and went for his gun. Her bullet caught him in the shoulder before he could clear leather. He dropped to his knees, gasping. "You know who I am?" she said, stepping close, her Colt steady. His eyes went wide. "Raven Doyle." The rest of his words were lost in the report of her gun. Caleb didn't stop her. The noise brought the rest of the camp alive. Men shouted, boots pounding, the clang of metal as rifles were snatched up. Caleb dropped behind a wagon, firing at the first figure that broke from the tents. Raven dove into cover beside him, reloading in a smooth, practiced motion. 3 left, Caleb said between shots. "Make that 2, she replied, and another gunman fell. One of the remaining men made a break for the horses. Caleb fired, the shot tearing through the man's leg. He went down screaming, clutching at the dirt. Then it was quiet again. Smoke from the fire drifted lazily in the air. The smell of blood was sharp, almost metallic. Raven walked to Porter's body, kneeling beside him. She wasn't gloating. She just stared, as if trying to see if killing him had changed anything inside her. "Feel better?" Caleb asked. "No," she said, standing. "But it's one less." They searched the camp quickly, finding only scraps of information. A half-finished map, a stash of rifles, a letter with Slade's name scrawled in the corner. "He's headed south," Caleb said, scanning the letter. "Toward the border." "That's 2 days' ride," Raven said. "Then we don't waste time." They took 2 fresh horses from the corral, leaving the wounded man tied where the others might find him. By mid-afternoon, they were back on the trail, the sun baking the canyon walls. It was Raven who spotted the vultures first, black dots circling low over a patch of ground ahead. When they reached it, they found the remains of a wagon, splintered and burned. Bodies lay sprawled in the dust, their clothes torn. "This wasn't robbery," Caleb said, crouching beside one of the dead. The man's pockets were still full, coins glinting in the sun. "Message," Raven said. "Slade's telling folks what happens if they cross him." The sight pulled Caleb back to Red Hollow, to the day he'd found his wife's body. He straightened abruptly, his voice flat. "We ride until dark." The land grew rougher, the trail narrowing to a path barely wide enough for the horses. The air smelled of pine and rain, clouds gathering on the horizon. As dusk settled, they found shelter under a rocky overhang. Caleb started a small fire while Raven sat sharpening her knife. The rhythm of the blade against stone was steady, almost calming, until she spoke. "You said he took your wife." Caleb didn't look up. "Her name was Anna. We were married 2 years. She taught school in Red Hollow. When Slade's gang came through, she tried to get the children out. He shot her himself." Raven's hand stilled. "And you've been hunting him ever since." "Not hunting, chasing. Hunting means you've got the upper hand." The rain began in light spits, tapping against the rocks. "You ever think about what happens after?" she asked. "There is no after," Caleb said. "There's before Slade's dead, and after I'm in the ground." She didn't press him. They ate in silence, the fire throwing long shadows on the rock. Somewhere in the night, Caleb woke to the sound of Raven's breathing close by. She was sitting against the wall, gun in her lap, eyes on the trail below. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Dreams are worse than being awake," she said. He knew that truth well enough. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was colder, sharper. They rode out early, the trail twisting along the side of a steep ridge. Below, the river cut through the valley like a silver blade. It was just past noon when they heard gunfire ahead, short, sharp bursts. They urged the horses forward, coming around a bend to find a small camp under attack. 2 men were pinned behind an overturned wagon, shooting at riders on the far bank. Without hesitation, Caleb and Raven joined the fight. Her first shot dropped a rider into the river. Caleb picked off another as the man tried to reload. The remaining attackers broke and fled, leaving the camp in silence except for the rush of the river. The 2 men they'd helped were shaken but alive. One of them, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, nodded in thanks. "Slade's men," he said. "They're moving through in force. Heard they're meeting someone at the old trading post by sundown tomorrow." That was all Caleb needed to hear. He looked at Raven. "That's where we end this," he said. Her smile was small, almost grim. "Good. I'm tired of riding." They pushed hard, the urgency in their pace making the miles vanish under the horses' hooves. As night closed in, the mountains loomed ahead, black against the stars. Somewhere in that darkness, Slade was waiting, and Caleb knew they were riding straight into the heart of it. By the time they reached the outskirts of the trading post, night had swallowed the land whole. The moon hid behind thick clouds, turning everything into shades of black and gray. The old post stood like a skeleton in the dark, long abandoned, its roof sagging, walls patched with rough boards. No light showed through the cracks, but Caleb knew better than to trust the stillness. They tied the horses in a stand of scrub oak 100 yards off. The wind carried the faint tang of smoke and something sharper, gun oil. "South side," Caleb whispered. Raven nodded, slipping into the shadows without a sound. Her figure blended into the darkness so completely that if he hadn't been watching, he might have believed she'd vanished. Caleb took the opposite side, moving low, Colt drawn but held close. From somewhere inside came the creak of boots on old floorboards. Two voices spoke in hushed tones. Men who thought they were safe. Caleb reached the corner of the building and froze. Through a gap in the boards, he could see them. 3 men around a table, a lantern throwing their shadows long against the wall. One of them was Slade. Even sitting, Slade carried himself like he owned the room. His hat was pushed back, showing a face lined and weathered, but the eyes were the same as the day in Red Hollow. Cold, empty. The third man at the table was a stranger, dressed better than the others, his coat tailored and clean. A merchant, maybe, the kind of man who had something to gain from dealing with killers. Raven reappeared at Caleb's side, her breath soft. 5 outside, she whispered. 2 by the corral, 3 watching the front. Caleb's mind worked quick. We take the outer guards first. Quiet. Then the ones inside won't know what hit them. She gave a single nod, eyes hard. They moved like shadows, the first man outside never even turning before Raven's knife slid between his ribs. Caleb caught the second by the back of the neck, driving him into the wall with enough force to drop him unconscious. By the time they reached the front of the post, only 3 stood between them and the door. Raven took the far left, Caleb the right. They struck almost in the same breath. 3 muffled grunts, and the yard was silent. Caleb stepped to the doorway, pushing it open with the barrel of his gun. The hinges gave a faint groan. Slade looked up first. For the space of a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Slade smiled, slow and knowing. "Heart," he said. "I was wondering when you'd come crawling." Caleb stepped inside, Raven a step behind him. "I'm not here to crawl," Caleb said. The merchant glanced between them nervously. "What is this?" "Shut up," Slade said without looking at him. His eyes never left Caleb's. 5 years, and you finally get close enough to pull the trigger. What stopped you before? Or is this just your way of saying you forgive me? Caleb's voice was like stone. You think I came here for forgiveness? Slade leaned back, his boots propped on the edge of the table. I think you came here because you've got nothing else. When a man's whole life is built on chasing another, he's got to wonder what's left when it's over. Raven stepped forward, her Colt leveled. Then let's find out right now. Slade's gaze flicked to her, and his smile widened. Raven Doyle, thought you died in a ditch somewhere. Not yet, she said. But you will. The merchant shifted in his seat, his hand edging toward the inside of his coat. Caleb saw it and fired before the man could clear a weapon. The crack of the gunshot shattered the tension. Slade's chair tipped as he kicked it back, drawing his own revolver. The table went over, the lantern clattering to the floor and spilling flame across the boards. The room erupted into chaos, gunfire, the roar of fire catching on dry wood, the acrid sting of smoke. Caleb ducked behind the overturned table, firing at Slade as the outlaw moved toward the back door. Raven was already there, blocking his path. She fired, grazing his arm, but he slammed into her hard enough to knock her sideways. Her gun skidded across the floor. Caleb surged up, closing the distance. Slade swung at him, the punch catching Caleb in the jaw. They went down hard, fists and elbows, the floor shaking under their weight. The fire climbed the walls now, heat pressing against them. Raven grabbed her gun and fired past Caleb, forcing one of Slade's men back through the door. Slade drove a knee into Caleb's ribs, breaking free just long enough to bolt for the back. Caleb stumbled up, ignoring the ache in his side, and followed. They burst into the night, the cool air a shock after the heat inside. Slade was fast for a man his age, darting toward the corral. Caleb raised his gun, but a shout from behind made him turn. 2 more of Slade's men had appeared from the darkness, guns drawn. Raven's shot dropped the first before he could fire. Caleb spun and took the second, the blast echoing through the yard. But Slade was gone. They found his trail easy enough, hoofprints cutting south into the scrub. Caleb's jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. "We go after him now," Raven said. "Not in the dark," Caleb replied. "He knows this land. We don't." She didn't like it, but she didn't argue. They moved the horses away from the burning trading post, the flames lighting the sky behind them. Smoke curled up into the night, a signal to anyone within 20 miles that trouble had been there. When they made camp, neither spoke for a long while. Caleb sat cleaning his gun, every movement deliberate, while Raven paced the edge of the firelight like a caged animal. "He's close," she said finally. "I know. And if you hadn't stopped to kill that merchant." "He was reaching for a gun," Caleb snapped. "Maybe," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Or maybe you're not ready to kill Slade." The words landed like a slap. Caleb stood, closing the space between them. "Don't mistake patience for hesitation." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned away. "Patience gets you killed out here." The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the dark. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, and the sound seemed to pull the night in tighter. When dawn broke, they were already on the trail. Slade's tracks were easy to follow. The ground was soft from recent rain, and his horse had a distinct limp in the right hind leg. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge and saw him below, riding hard toward a cluster of low buildings. Caleb raised his spyglass, studying the place. A small ranch, but fortified. Fences high, windows shuttered. A pair of armed men on the porch. "That's where he's headed," Caleb said. "Then we take it," Raven replied. "It's not that simple." He handed her the glass. "Count the rifles." She scanned, then lowered it slowly. 4, maybe more inside. We wait till nightfall. The day dragged, the sun beating down while they stayed hidden in the rocks. Caleb could feel the tension coiling in Raven with every hour. When the light finally bled from the sky, they moved. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, the only approach open ground broken by a few scrub bushes. They kept low, crossing the distance until they reached the fence. Caleb cut the wire with slow, careful snips, the faint twang of metal lost in the wind. Inside the yard, the shadows swallowed them whole. A guard stepped around the corner of the house, rifle over his shoulder. Raven slipped up behind him, her knife flashing once. He went down without a sound. They reached the porch. Caleb took the left side, Raven the right. On his signal, they pushed through the door, guns up. The room inside was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. Slade sat at a table, a bottle in front of him. He didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon. "Took you long enough," he said. Caleb kept the gun steady. "End of the trail, Slade." Slade's eyes flicked to Raven. "And you? I thought you'd have learned by now. Vengeance don't fill the hole." Raven stepped forward, her voice low. "It doesn't have to. It just has to bury you in it." Before either could fire, the sound of boots pounded from the hallway. Caleb turned, firing at the first man through the doorway. Raven spun toward another, her shot catching him square. Slade flipped the table, the bottle smashing as it hit the floor. He dove through the open window, glass shattering around him. Caleb cursed, bolting for the door, but by the time he hit the yard, Slade was already on horseback, spurring the animal into the dark. They fired, both of them, but the night swallowed him. Breathing hard, Caleb lowered his gun. Raven stood beside him, her chest rising and falling. "He's running," she said. "He's buying time," Caleb replied. "And I'm done giving it to him." They mounted up without another word, riding into the blackness after a man who had escaped too many times. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, and in the cold wind, his resolve was a solid thing in his chest. Next time he saw Slade, it would end. One way or another. The wind cut sharp across the plains, bringing with it the smell of rain and blood. By the time we made it back to town, the sun was sinking low, bleeding red light over the rooftops like it was warning us what was coming. The streets were too quiet. No drunks outside the saloon. No kids running after a stray chicken. Just that heavy, waiting silence. I could feel every step of my boots on the boards, Could hear Sheriff Dawson's breathing, slow and steady like he was trying to hide how on edge he was. We both knew why. Clayton Crow wasn't just another outlaw. He was the kind who didn't knock on doors, he kicked them down. And we just put a hole clean through his little brother's chest. The townsfolk peeked through curtains as we passed. Some of them nodded to Dawson, like they still believed the badge meant safety. Others gave me looks like they were sizing me up for a noose. I'd been in towns like this before. Loyalty here wasn't to the law, it was to whoever had the most guns and the fewest scruples. Inside the sheriff's office, the smell of old paper and gun oil wrapped around us. Dawson locked the door, crossed to the rack, and pulled down a double-barreled shotgun. "They'll be coming tonight," he said without looking at me. "Crow's not the waiting kind." I leaned against the desk, watching him load shells. "Then we make sure we're ready." His eyes flicked up. "We? You think I'm gonna ride off now? After what we did?" My voice came out sharper than I meant, but it got his attention. "Crow's not just coming for you, Dawson. He's coming for me too. And I'd rather be standing beside you when he does." Something flickered in his expression, reluctance maybe, or trust, though I wasn't sure which one would get us killed faster. We spent the next hour checking ammo, boarding windows, and setting lanterns in just the right places so the light wouldn't give away our positions. My hands worked fast, but my mind was a storm. Every sound outside made me think I heard the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. It was just past midnight when they came. The first shot shattered the stillness. A single rifle crack from somewhere in the dark. The bullet splintered the sign outside, scattering wood across the boardwalk. Dawson was at the window in a heartbeat, returning fire, his shotgun booming through the night. I crouched low, Colt in hand, scanning the shadows for movement. Then I saw them. 3 riders at first, keeping low in their saddles, weaving between buildings as they closed in. But I knew there'd be more. Crow's gang was like ants, kill a few, and twice as many swarmed in to take their place. "Left side," I shouted, squeezing off a shot. One rider tumbled from his horse, rolling in the dirt before lying still. Another shot cracked from the alley, the bullet grazing my arm. I bit back a curse, the sting sharp enough to make my hand shake. Dawson's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay down." But I didn't. I darted toward the back door, kicked it open, and slipped into the shadows. I'd learned a long time ago you couldn't just wait for death to come to you. You had to hunt it first. The alley stank of whiskey and rotting garbage. My boots crunched on broken glass as I edged toward the gunfire. A shadow moved just ahead, and I didn't hesitate. One pull of the trigger, and the man dropped, his rifle clattering beside him. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate clap. "Didn't think you had it in you, girl." Clayton Crow stepped into the lantern light, tall and lean, his long coat swaying like he was part of the night itself. His grin didn't touch his eyes. "Sheriff's been keeping you real close, hasn't he? Tell me, are you his partner in the law, or just his partner in bed?" I kept my gun steady, even though my heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. "You here to talk, Crow, or are we gonna finish this?" "Oh, we'll finish it," he said, taking a slow step forward. "But I want you to see something first." 2 of his men dragged a figure into the light. Blood matted the man's hair, and his hands were tied behind his back. My stomach dropped. It was Tom Weaver, the storekeeper's boy, barely 16. "You kill a man's brother," Crow said, his voice low and steady. "You take away something he can't get back. I reckon you ought to understand that before I return the favor." I could hear Dawson shouting my name somewhere behind me, but my feet were rooted. Crow pulled a knife from his belt, its edge catching the lantern glow. I had seconds to act. The first shot I fired missed his head by inches, but it made him pause long enough for me to lunge forward. I slammed into him, the knife clattering to the dirt. His men shouted, raising their guns, but before they could fire, Dawson's shotgun roared from the mouth of the alley. The blast tore through one of them, and the other bolted into the dark. Crow fought like a man possessed, his fists hard as iron. I hit the ground hard, the air rushing out of my lungs, but I rolled, came up on one knee, and pressed my gun to his chest. He froze. For a moment, the only sound was our breathing. Then slowly he smiled. "You ain't gonna do it." I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed down the alley, and Crow's body hit the dirt. Dawson was beside me in seconds, cutting the boy loose. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from knowing what that moment had cost me. We walked back to the sheriff's office together, the boy between us, his face pale and eyes wide. The town was waking now, lamps flickering in windows, voices calling out. But the night still felt heavy, like it hadn't finished with us yet. And deep down, I knew it hadn't, because Crow was dead. But his shadow was still out there. And shadows in the west have a way of swallowing everything they touch. The wind cut sharp across the ridge as if it carried whispers from the dead. Night had not yet fully fallen, but the last of the sun's warmth was gone, replaced by the cold bite that always settled over the desert after dark. Shadows stretched long over the rocks, twisting into shapes that made a man glance twice. Down below, in the shallow valley, the campfire of Carson's gang flickered like a warning. Jake sat low on his horse, his jaw tight, eyes locked on that fire. He could make out a few of the gang, silhouettes moving around, laughing, passing bottles, but Carson wasn't among them. He knew better than to show himself until it was time to strike. Behind him, Eliza shifted in her saddle. Her breathing was slow, measured, but her eyes were sharp, tracing every movement down below. She was dressed in her dark riding coat, hat pulled low, revolver resting easy in her lap. "You go in quiet," she murmured, "and you won't come back out." Jake didn't look at her. "What's your suggestion?" Her gaze didn't leave the camp. "We wait until they're too drunk to tell Sky from dirt. Then we hit 'em hard. Carson'll be there by then. He won't risk his boys getting taken without him." Jake thought about that. Waiting meant another hour or two, maybe more. But charging in now, alone, they'd be outnumbered, cut down before they even reached Carson. "I know you're itching to put a bullet in him," Eliza said, finally glancing his way. "But rushing in gets you dead. I've seen too many good men lose their lives because they wanted it over fast." Jake finally met her eyes. The firelight from below caught in her irises, making them burn amber. "And you've lived this long because you wait?" She smiled faintly. "Because I choose my moments." They sat in silence a while longer. The desert night crept in around them, carrying the faint scent of mesquite smoke from the gang's fire. Coyotes called from somewhere far off, their cries haunting against the stillness. Down below, the laughter got louder, sloppier. One of the men stumbled and fell into the dirt, drawing jeers from the others. A bottle smashed. Jake leaned forward in his saddle. "They're half gone already." "Half gone isn't all the way," Eliza replied. But she was watching closely now, her hand resting on the grip of her gun. Then movement. From the north edge of the camp, a lone rider appeared, his horse dark against the starlit backdrop. Even from this distance, Jake recognized the way the man sat in the saddle, back straight, head high, as if the whole world belonged to him. "Carson." Jake's pulse quickened. Eliza felt it without looking at him. "That's your moment right there." Carson dismounted, tossing the reins to one of his men without a word. He moved toward the fire, the others parting for him like he was a preacher walking up to a pulpit. Even in the flicker of the flames, the scar on his jaw caught the light. Jake's grip tightened on his reins. He'd been chasing that man's shadow for months, carrying the weight of each killing, each robbery Carson had left behind. But this wasn't just about justice anymore. Not after what Carson did to Luke. "Remember," Eliza's voice was low, steady, "you put him down and you put him down clean. Don't give him a chance to talk his way out." Jake gave a single nod. "We go now." Eliza's smile was grim. "Thought you'd never ask." They moved fast, keeping low in the saddle, riding the ridge until they could cut down into the valley from the east side. The sound of the horses was masked by the laughter and shouting below. By the time the gang saw the shapes moving out of the dark, it was too late. Jake's first shot rang out, dropping one of Carson's men before the others could grab their rifles. Chaos exploded around the campfire. Men scattering, some firing blindly, others diving for cover. Eliza was a shadow in the chaos, her revolver barking twice in quick succession, both bullets finding their marks. Carson ducked behind a wagon, shouting orders. "Circle M. Don't let M through." Jake kicked his horse forward, forcing a path straight toward the wagon. Bullets whipped past his head. He slid out of the saddle before the horse had even stopped, using its flank for cover as he closed in. Carson rose from behind the wagon, revolver in hand. Their eyes locked across the flames, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. "Sheriff," Carson called, voice mocking. "Been a long ride, hasn't it?" Jake didn't answer. He fired. The shot hit the edge of the wagon, splintering wood inches from Carson's arm. Carson dove for cover, returning fire. Eliza moved to flank him, slipping between the shadows. She could see Jake's focus narrowing, every muscle in his body aimed toward one thing, ending Carson. Then a shot ripped past her ear, and she spun to see another of Carson's men aiming again. She dropped him with a single bullet, heart pounding. Jake pushed forward, closing the distance. Carson's next shot grazed his shoulder, tearing through cloth and skin, but he didn't stop. He hit the wagon hard, sending it rocking. Carson stumbled back, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough to smell the sweat and whiskey on each other. Jake swung first. The punch caught Carson across the jaw, snapping his head sideways. Carson fired, but the shot went wild into the night. They grappled, slamming into the wagon, fists and elbows flying. "You think you can take me in?" Carson snarled, shoving him back. "You'll have to kill me first." "That's the plan," Jake growled. Before Carson could reach for his gun again, Eliza appeared behind him. Her revolver was aimed steady at the back of his head. "Drop it." Carson froze. For the first time, Jake saw something in his eyes that looked like doubt. The camp had gone near silent now. Most of Carson's men lay dead or had fled into the darkness. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the dirt. Slowly, Carson lowered the gun. Jake stepped forward, breathing hard, blood from his shoulder soaking into his shirt. "You're done, Carson." But Carson's smirk returned, faint but defiant. "You think the law's gonna hold me? You've no idea how deep my reach goes." Jake leveled his gun at Carson's chest. "Then I'll make sure you don't get the chance." Eliza's eyes flicked between them. She could feel the weight of the moment. One pull of the trigger and it'd all be over. But she also knew there was more to this than revenge. If Carson died here, the truth he carried would die with him. "Jake," she said, her voice low. "We need him to talk." Jake didn't move. "Please," she pressed. "He's more valuable breathing for now." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Slowly, he lowered the gun, keeping it trained on Carson as he stepped forward to cuff him. Carson chuckled, shaking his head. "You're making a mistake, Lawman." Eliza stepped in close, her voice sharp enough to cut through the night. "The mistake was thinking we wouldn't catch you." The wind picked up again, scattering ashes from the fire into the dark. Somewhere far off, another coyote howled. And in the space between heartbeats, Jake realized something. Catching Carson hadn't ended anything. If anything, it had just begun. The morning broke red, the kind of red that told you the land was holding its breath before something terrible. The sky over Dry Creek seemed bruised, low clouds dragging shadows across the valley. The air was too still, too quiet, like the whole town was bracing for the sound of gunfire. The sheriff was already saddling his horse when Lila stepped out of the boarding house. Her hair was tied back, her gun belt snug, her eyes sharp and unreadable. They hadn't spoken much since the night before, when she'd whispered that promise, the one that had been haunting him since. "I'll follow you to hell, Sheriff." Neither of them said a word as she swung up into the saddle. They didn't need to. The weight of what was coming pressed down heavy enough. Outlaws didn't ride into a town just to talk, and Harlan Pike wasn't the type to leave without blood spilled. They rode side by side out of Dry Creek, their horses' hooves throwing dust that caught the morning light. The hills rose ahead, jagged and dry, and somewhere past them Pike's gang waited. The sheriff's badge felt heavier than it ever had before. This wasn't just about law anymore. This was about the lines between right and wrong being ground into the dirt beneath a dozen hooves. By mid-morning, they found them. Pike and his men sat their horses in a shallow draw, rifles laid across their saddles, eyes like wolves waiting on the kill. Pike grinned when he saw them, his scar catching the light. "Well, hell," Pike drawled. "If it ain't the lawman and his pet thief." Lila didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Still hiding behind your boys, Pike?" The men around him chuckled low, but Pike's grin twitched into something sharper. "You always did have a mouth on you, girl. Shame it's the last thing you'll get to use." The sheriff's voice cut in, calm but cold. "We're not here for talk. You give me the girl you took from the ranch, the money you stole, and maybe you get to ride out alive." Pike spat into the dust. "Ain't gonna happen. You want her, you'll have to take her off my hands yourself." The draw turned silent again. Somewhere, a hawk screamed. Then Pike's hand twitched toward his gun. The first shot cracked like thunder. Dust flew from the ground at the sheriff's feet, and the world exploded into the chaos of lead and horse screams. Lila fired twice before her horse even stopped moving, dropping one of Pike's men clean out of the saddle. The sheriff wheeled his mount hard, taking cover behind a boulder as bullets kicked up dirt around him. They fought their way forward, pushing Pike's men back toward the rocks. Lila moved like she'd been born in the fight. Every shot quick and sure, every step forward like she had something to prove. Pike yelled for his men to hold, but the tide had turned, and one by one they went down. When the gunfire faded, only Pike was left standing. His rifle was gone, his hat trampled into the dirt, his breath coming in hard rasps. Lila's gun stayed trained on him, but the sheriff stepped forward, his own revolver steady. "This ends now," the sheriff said. Pike laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "You think killing me changes a damn thing? You think it saves her?" He nodded toward the rocks, and for the first time the sheriff heard it, the faint sound of crying. The girl they'd come for. Lila glanced at the sheriff, a question in her eyes. He gave a slight nod, and she moved, circling around the boulders to find the girl. Pike's eyes followed her, that grin twitching back onto his face. "You can't protect her," he hissed. "You can't protect any of them. The world don't let men like you win." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but it's sure as hell gonna let me bury you." The shot was quick, final. Pike crumpled into the dirt, the red from his coat blooming across the dust. Lila came back with the girl, a thin, terrified thing clutching a ragged shawl. The sheriff took her gently, lifting her into the saddle. Lila's eyes met his, something unspoken passing between them. They didn't speak on the ride back. The sun was dipping low, turning the valley gold, and the wind finally picked up, scattering the dust from the fight. When they reached Dry Creek, folks gathered in the street, their faces a mix of relief and fear. The sheriff handed the girl over to the schoolteacher, who whisked her inside. Then he turned to Lila. "You could ride out now," he said quietly. "No one would stop you." She looked past him to the road leading out of town, then back at him. "And leave you here alone?" She shook her head. "Told you before, Sheriff. I'll follow you to hell." He searched her face for a moment, then gave the smallest of nods. The dust from the trail still clung to her hair, and the sun caught the edge of her smile, faint but real. The town wasn't safe yet. There'd be more men like Pike, more fights waiting down the road. But for now, the lawman and the outlaw girl stood together, side by side in the fading light. And whatever hell was coming, they'd ride into it together. That's the story of a sheriff and an outlaw girl bound by blood, bullets, and a promise that no matter how dark the road gets, they'd ride it together, even to hell. If you thought that was wild, just wait. The West isn't done telling its secrets. Hit like if you want more stories where loyalty gets tested, hearts get broken, and justice comes with a bullet. Subscribe now, because the next tale is already waiting in the shadows, ready to pull you deeper into the lawless dust of the Wild West. Don't miss it.